No, I want to go. Welcome to the Blunt and the Beautiful, where society comes to be dissected.
Don't hit the C on comes like that.
Welcome to the Blunt and the Beautiful, where I discuss everything that interests me and everything that should interest you with my beautiful daughter, Tansy.
And I listen and tell her when she's wrong.
Hello and welcome to the Blunt and the Beautiful. Hello, Miss Tansy.
Hello, Katie. How are you?
I'm very well, and we have the beautiful Karina Machado here, all the way from Uruguay via Sydney.
And before that, via Spain,
Oh,
my ancestral.
Ancestral lineage of Spain. Now, I met Karina, everyone, doing an astrology session, and we just had an instant moment of, oh, you're one of me, I'm one of you, we're together. And I've had a lot of requests, as you have, for having a little bit of a witchy episode.
Bit of a spooky time.
Spooky times. And Karina has written 3 books, non-fiction books on spirit and ghosties. And I really want to jump into that because Karina and I on the way here were talking about the fact that a lot of people have these experiences.
That's right.
And they don't always, want to talk about it because your book starts, Spirit Sisters, and I'll link it in the show notes. Your book starts with a lot of people saying, I haven't told anyone this.
Exactly. It's what I would hear constantly over and over again. I've actually never told anyone this. You're the first. Or people are going to think I'm crazy. I used to hear that all the time. People are going to think I'm crazy. And it's not the case. And I was really happy to be able to offer just a warm space for them to share that story.
Well, yeah, I read the book over the weekend and I loved it. It is. She's got 3 of them in the same vein, and I really loved it because I just believed. I just didn't have a moment of, oh, hang on, she's having a bit of a mentee bee. I really believed, and I do think that you balance it very well in terms of talking to psychologists, talking to people around the brain, and then talking to parapsychologists and paranormal experts. And I want to start with, you open the book with a story of a plumber in 1953 in York. He's working on a building. Now, York was the original Roman town, and he's doing some work, putting a heater in, and suddenly he sees a Roman soldier coming out of the wall on a horse with a lot of foot soldiers behind him, very bedraggled, very dirty, and they're all carrying armament and certain types of costume. Is that right? Did I get that right?
That's right. And that is one of my favourite ghost stories. We can say ghost stories, but it's actually resonant of something else. And I love that story because that was such a credible witness, as he proved himself to be. His story never, I can't remember his name now, Harry someone.
Yeah, Harry, yep.
His story never altered. And I think he went on to become a policeman. He was very respected in his community. And he passed away some years ago, and his story never changed. And he was as surprised as anyone else that he should be the one experiencing this extraordinary event. And yes, he was working on this building. He was a young bloke at the time, and something in the atmosphere shifted, and these Roman soldiers just walked through the building, and it would have been what was the Roman road.
Right.
So they were, if I'm remembering correctly, Kate, because Spirit Sisters came out in 2009, but he saw them from their knees up, I think, and then later it was established that would have been the Roman road.
Yeah,
so that's why he was seeing them at that point.
And he had he went and spoke to a historian at York University, which specialises in, the Roman artefacts and the history, because there's so many artefacts from that area. And he could date it to the 4th century because he said, well, this is what sort of weapon this person was holding, or armament or dress, and he could date it back.
That's right.
That's amazing.
Now, this was in 1953. He couldn't go and Google that.
No, he couldn't. And I can understand why he would feel that sharing that with people, that is not necessarily like quote unquote a safe space, or as you I think, beautifully put it, a warm space for that to be received. Because I think people are very quick to be like, be fucking for real. That didn't happen. And you're like, no, it did.
Yeah.
And you have to really advocate for yourself in a way that feels really strange when you're like, I'm trying to explain this amazing thing that happened. And people just are so quick to not believe you, basically.
That's right. That's right. And I think that's right. Harry was extraordinary because it was all those years ago, and he did go public with his story back then, and later went on to, you know, appear on TV in the UK. And he was open about sharing the story. And I love what you say about the piece that came later with the dating, because initially the kind of shield, I think it was, that he saw was not known to have been a kind of shield that this particular cavalry had. So that came much later, that piece of identification, and it was another, validation of the story. I love time slip stories. We could call that one a time slip story, when the past and the present intermingle, and it's just so spooky, so wonderfully spooky.
Well, the thing that, you know, and you and I spoke this morning about this, is not just about ghost stories, but also intuition. Now, you obviously have a strong lineage to Spain and then Uruguay and now via Australia. Tell me about your first intuition / spiritual connections to the other side.
Well, a few things come to mind. One is the stories that my mother shared with me when I was really little, like I was about 7 or 8. She first began to share these stories of spiritual moments that she'd had in Uruguay as a young woman growing up. And for me, those stories, they really ignited, if not ignited my intuition, they ignited the remembrance in me of something deeper, something beyond the body. And also they connected me to my birth country, which is something that, you know, I'm exploring now in this novel that I'm writing very slowly, but it's about immigration and the wounds of immigration, and they go very deep.
Yeah.
And I'm only just sort of uncovering how deep. But to go back to your question, Kate, so that those moments when my mum shared, and they were about premonitions that she'd had about the imminent deaths of loved ones. One was a little cousin of hers that nobody knew was terminally ill, because they would keep the knowledge from family members in those times, thinking it was a mercy that they were giving them. But my mum was at work, and she had this sense, I've got to go and visit little Yolanda. And it was very unusual. And my mum, she's got a very strong work ethic. She's a Virgo. And she was she was only about 15, because my mum, she began working very young, and she thought, I've got to go and be with Yolanda. And long story short, she went and collected her mum and her aunt, and off they went to visit this little relative that was sick. Basically, my mum got there in time to be the only person with Yolanda when she passed. And she was 4 or 5 years old, and it was my mum at her side on that day. So that was one story. And then another that mum shared was around, again, similar theme. She knew that her uncle, who was only 41 or 42, very hale and hearty, very handsome. He sort of looked like Errol Flynn, and nobody had a thought that he was unwell. Well, he just collapsed of a cardiac arrest and died. And minutes before that happened, my mother yelled out, put the volume down, because they were all listening to the radio in the kitchen, cooking. She said, put the volume down, Uncle's dead. And then, because they lived out the back, so the two houses were just backing onto each other. And at that point, her auntie, so her uncle's wife, came running down to call for my grandfather, saying, he's collapsed. And my mum has this memory of her dad, like rubbing the chest of his brother, trying to bring him back to life, because he didn't know about compressions or anything back then, but he was rubbing his chest furiously, trying to bring him back to life, as, you know, tears streamed down his face. And that's what my mother remembers seeing. And she was right. So he passed. So those stories really ignited something. And also another thing that happened all around the same age, and I think 7 to 8 is an age where children begin to, well, no, they don't begin to, but they remember, and there's a point where you can choose to forget at that point, and a lot of children switch it off at that point.
They call it crossing the bridge, don't they?
Oh,
yeah. At 7, where a child is between two worlds until they're 7.
That's so like magical and poignant, and really rings true. And I think it was my experience, and I somehow chose to stay with it. But I remember going to friends' houses as parents. My parents would go and visit other other immigrant families from Uruguay. And, you know, they would do seances and they were trying to call not so much the dead, well, the dead, yes, but the old country.
Yeah.
You know, they were trying to keep
Yeah.
that link alive with the old country. And I remember being at the house of these friends with all the other kids, and we were banned. We were told to stay behind, you know, stay in the other area of the house, but we were all peeking. And seeing that wine glass, upturned wine glass, just sort of zip around the table was just something. It lit something in me that said, there's more. And it was never about being afraid. That's the thing. Like, I was never drawn to spooky stories that terrified me. It was always a flame of hope that they lit in me. And there's more behind that. I think, you know, my family was, as we said, immigration, it can be traumatic. My parents were young. So sometimes there's this sense that when I look back that it was a little bit unhappy, that I was lonely, that I missed the bigger family. And I think these stories and this possibility of something more just, it gave me hope. A thrill of hope.
Yeah. And I do think, you know, it's really interesting that the whole kind of connection to country, and, you know, people think it's a, you know, Aboriginal concept, but it's not. It's very, did some work with a archaeologist who said she never really understood it until she went back to Scotland and went, oh, okay, now I can feel it. It's DNA, it's science. I mean, someone said the other day, you know, science is just magic that has been explained. And I think a lot of this stuff that we're talking about is very similar. Now, you went for a walk on the Camino Way and your grandmother walked with you.
Yeah, my great-grandmother. I really felt her.
Wow.
So in the early 1900s, a lot of thousands of people from Spain were immigrating to the Americas, and my great-grandparents were among them. And so they left Galicia, which is in northwestern Spain, and it's the place where the Camino de Santiago has its conclusion as well. And they left there in the early 1900s, and then they went on to have 12 children in Uruguay. None of them ever went back. And neither my great-grandparents nor their kids, nobody in the family went back. My mother's never been to Spain. And so I really felt this call to go. And they say that the Camino calls you, and it really called me, and it became something visceral where I had to attend to this, and life made it possible for me to be able to go. And that's quite a separate story, and it's extraordinary as well how it facilitated this calling. And I was able to go, and walking through Spain was something so profound because, yes, I did feel like my great-grandmother was with me because I felt like I was going back for them as well, for not just for my great-grandparents, but for all of their children and the family that never got to see their country, like where they're from again. So all of my great-aunts and uncles who were Uruguayan by birth, but they have that heritage to Spain and they never were able to complete that.
But that ancestral veneration is really important, and I'm doing a lot of work around that, honouring your ancestors. And my ancestors, I started doing my family tree when I was in the middle of a clinical depression for something to do. And that actually opened up incredible doors, and I started writing my first book after that. And since many times over published. And I really believe that honouring your ancestors is so deeply powerful, and it doesn't have to be blood either. It's just an imprint.
Yes.
So when you started working on your book, were you the person that gets on a plane and someone wants to tell you their story? Like, how did you start to collect all these ghost stories?
Yeah, it's a great question. And because it was initially published so long ago, a anniversary edition came out in 2020, but things have changed so much since I was researching Spirit Sisters. So it was essentially word of mouth.
Right.
So people would tell me, oh, you should talk to this person, you should talk to that person. There were times that I travelled to people's houses as well. I put a little ad in the Daily Telegraph.
Fantastic.
There used to be this little section, now I can't remember what it was called, but you could just pop a little random ad in there.
Classifieds,
it
whatever
was
it is.
Public notices.
Yeah, it was something like that. And I popped a little ad in there that just said, have you had a paranormal spiritual experience? Tell me about it, essentially. It was 2 lines. And people they wrote to me. I've got letters, snail mail, that would go to a PO box, and email was around then, so I have emails as well. And I remember jumping on a plane one of the few times that I did travel to gather the story, because it was mainly by phone that I was doing it. But I went to Dubbo, and there was a woman who wrote to me to say that a very terrifying thing had happened to her when she was 13 years old in a house in Dubbo. And it had all come about through mucking around with a Ouija board. And so something told me this is a yarn, follow this up. So I did, and I'm glad I got to meet her in person, and her mother and sister, who also were able to corroborate the events. And that's one of the most terrifying stories.
So do you want to tell her, let's spook our listeners? what?
Well, so I'd like to preface it by saying that I don't think that a Ouija board in itself is something that is a portal to hell or anything. I think it's just a thing.
Yeah.
But what can happen is, if you have a combination of factors such as somebody young who's experiencing trauma, there was quite a lot of trauma in that home. There was abuse, and there were things that were happening that were undercurrents. So if you've got that, if you've got a young person or two, and there were two young sisters that have perhaps untapped psychic medium skills, psychic mediumship, and then you got the Ouija board and you're saying come, that's when you're potentially going to invite something that's really unsavory potentially, because it's about resonance and frequency. And it's not that poor young girl is unsavory or that there's anything inherently bad, but she's experiencing challenge, she's experiencing fear. It's the fear. Fear attracts the fear. And so they're just like young kids. They were mucking around with the Ouija board, and then what happened was poltergeist activity, like really quite horrendous manifestations. There was writing in a sort of sludge that appeared on the mirror, but it was not on the exterior of the mirror. It was somehow in it. And
I don't like that.
I know. It's just
look, that's my personal preference. I don't like that.
Yes, I know. And and what I remember about the young woman that I spoke to at the time that really stayed with me too was that she was haunted by this. She was a haunted person. This event had impacted her life in negative ways. She wasn't able to work. She had trauma about being around people. She had a spinal condition, I remember, that made life very hard for her in some respects. And I just remember I'm talking happily and openly here, but sometimes I can be a bit shy, but she made me look like an extrovert. She was very timid, and like life had diminished her in a way. And she had a lovely partner, which I was so happy that, part of her life had bloomed in that way. But it was,
Had she tried, because I know you talk about the man who doesn't really charge to go and cleanse houses and get rid of, dispirited spirits, as it were. Had she tried clearings or?
No, because she was really young when it happened. So when I interviewed her, she was in her, I think, late 30s. And when it happened, she was about 13. So she didn't have sort of the means, and the house was a very sort of fractured environment as well. And as I'm remembering the story, I'm remembering that she became like a pariah in her house, because activity would happen around her. I remember she was sort of sadly kicked out of the house and went to live at her friend's caravan. And when she did that, the paranormal activity followed her there. So all of, cupboards being opened, stuff being flung out, all sorts of really unsettling things. And so I remember she moved to Sydney when she was very, very young, and found, I think, a relative or a friend to stay with. But it upended her life. And she was somebody that could have done with some stability, and this was obviously not forthcoming, especially after these circumstances.
It's funny, isn't it? When my mother-in-law died, she died she died at 55, so it's quite young. And or 57, one or the other, can't remember, but I do remember that the night she died, my sister-in-law came home and the baby's crib, she had a new baby at the time, had been moved to the centre of the room, and all this stuff had been moved around it. Like, you can't explain that, and people are going to poo-poo it. Fine.
Well, this is the thing. How do you ask for support if you're being positively bamboozled
Ghostbusters.
by...
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly. Who you're going to call? No one is going to listen to
That's
you.
right.
Well, I think people are becoming more open
Yes.
about it, though, because I do know someone who is a clearer.
Yeah.
Who'll come and clear spaces. She doesn't work very often, and she chooses because the energy, and this is what it is. It is the energy that is left from the person who's passed can attach to you, and you have to be quite discerning around that. In the book, you write about the two main theories of ghost being the psychic imprint and then the apparition of a living person. Can you explain that a bit more?
Yeah, there's this sense that, well, questions around what is it that we're experiencing. So the imprint idea is that you're not sensing a sentient spirit. You are seeing a flash of the past, much like our plumber in York. It's not that those soldiers were sentient and attached to his frequency, that there was something, a communication going on. No, that was very much him seeing a moment that, because of its emotional depth perhaps, had imprinted itself on that landscape. And there are a lot of landscapes in the UK and in Europe that are said to be, these kind of portals because of what's happened there, whether they're battlefields or... So that's the imprint idea, that you're seeing. And I remember now interviewing people that have had those imprints, such as a woman who would tell me that at the same time every morning a woman in colonial costume and her daughter would just walk, come through the wall and go past her bed, I think it was, or a lounge, or her bed, thank you, and right through to the other side, and she'd just see that. So that's an imprint. That's something that for some reason that woman is connecting with that moment, but it's not a communication. Now, the sentient spirit, the apparition, and not all apparitions are sentient, I don't think, as well, but a ghost or a spirit that is wanting to communicate with you, that is there, that they're making the choice to return for a purpose, to share a message. So they're sort of the basic, there are other theories around there, but yes, sentient or not sentient, essentially.
Well, as I said to you, we lived in a house that was a very beautiful Gothic Victorian house, and it had been a mother-baby home for mothers giving birth, and then in World War II it became a soldiers' hospital for returning soldiers from France. And I don't get ghosties don't come to me. Tansy and her father both got ghost visions in this house, and of the same thing.
Often in the same spot. And then, a friend of Spike's came to stay and he could see the same thing that Dave and I had been describing, which felt very odd. And it felt like a thing where I believed what I had seen. And then when my dad, because I don't know, I was a teenage girl at the time, when my dad had been like, no, I can see that too, I was like, okay. But then someone who's outside of the family unit being like, no, that's there, really felt like confirmation.
That's definitely confirmation. Yeah.
But it was this little girl and a little boy in different spots around the house, particularly on the landing of the stairs, or the back bedroom that would have been kind of the servants' or maids' quarters up on the second floor. And often with just a little teddy doll thing, often just sitting, often just kind of looking.
I just remember that you were telling me that we had an amazing clawfoot bath, and Tansy was having a bath, and she looked out and the little girl was playing with the doll on the floor of the bathroom.
Yes.
Like...
I saw the little girl 48 times more than I saw the little boy. The little girl, I saw her constantly. And I, at the time, had just lost one of my closest friends to suicide. And so I was in a very emotionally fraught place, and it just felt like this little girl was everywhere.
Wow.
And I remember seeing her when I was in the bath, her playing on the floor, and I was like, I'm not your mum. What are you doing? What are you, and it was obviously she's not.
She wasn't communicating.
No, she was ignoring me, but I could just see her.
Right.
Very often.
Well, that sounds extraordinary. Like, I don't think that that's a kind of a time slip. I think that is a sentient spirit. I think there was some connection there with either her comforting you or you comforting her. And yeah, there was definitely a resonance between you there. I'm feeling anyway. That's my sense. That's a beautiful story.
One of the things you talk about in the book is how the world is defined by male energy, and that is science, capitalism. We need explanations. And a lot of our female understanding and our intuition and our connection to our bodies and the world around us is feminine, and that, you know, women can pick these things up. You know about when you're pregnant, what you feel. You can feel your baby about to wake up before your baby's woken up. All of those divine connection, feminine things. And as the rise of women's rights, I'm drawing a bow here, but work with me.
Yeah, right back. Let's go.
I'm pulling it back. I think that the rise of women's rights and equality has allowed women to say more of this divine intuition. Now, you were talking about these heretics on the way here. Can you explain that? Because that will tie into my very long bow theory about women's rights and intuition.
Yes. So what I mentioned to Kate in the car coming here was that, and Kate was talking all about that, which she just touched on. And I thought, oh, that reminds me of various prophecies that were in different spiritual traditions that all seem to point to this time being something really significant, especially in accord with this idea of the rise of the feminine principle, and or we can call it the divine feminine principle, which has been so repressed. And one of the points that I called on was this idea of the Cathars. They were a Christian sect in the south of, the south of France. I'm sorry, I can't remember the exact century, but it might be the 1300s. And they were all massacred by the church as heretics because they were followers of a very pure kind of Christianity that was essentially just doing good. And they didn't follow the protocols of the Catholic Church. So they were all burnt at the stake. But they had a prophecy that was around this time, this particular time, being the blooming of a new age where the feminine principle will arise again, and there will be a more peaceful sort of an understanding, an accord between humans. But it must be this, it all comes back to this idea of embracing the feminine, and these qualities.
Wow.
And I love that because I think you can be strong and earn more money and be powerful and amazing, friend and parent, but you don't have to lose your feminine side. And that's where the imbalance has been. And you said that's the Indigenous Americans think the wings are unbalanced.
That's right. There's a prophecy too that the wings will be, the human bird will fly again as it should, that it's been flying with one wing. Yeah. So it's very interesting, all of these pointers to this time. But
sorry. No, you go.
Oh, no, I was just going to say that's why I wrote Spirit Sisters, and that's why it's a book of all women's experiences. In the two books that followed, I did interview guys as well, and now on the Spirit Sisters podcast, I also interview men. But that first book, it felt really important to me to celebrate this idea, which is something that I love to do, which is this, and it's gather around, I call it the virtual hearth, and we share our stories as women. And I loved doing that with my mother and my sister. And again, it goes back to that family that I missed out on. I would have loved to have had my grandmother and my aunts. I didn't. So I did it in a community with friends and others, women. And so that's the idea that I really wanted to celebrate, that we have this profound wisdom, and it is in our stories. And there's no shame in sharing those stories.
No. I do think people struggle with the pain of it, though, because one of the stories that really kind of really hit me was the mum who felt her son's death 24 hours before he died. She said that the moment she woke up that day, she felt her son's death tiptoeing towards her, which was beautifully phrased. But her son had drug and alcohol issues. He'd been in a rehab centre. He had escaped, and at 8:05 that night, she felt a pain in her chest that she thought, I'm having a cardiac arrest. And her young daughter started vomiting out of nowhere, just like at 8:05, absolutely. Then at 9 o'clock that night, her sister rang to say that her shed had been broken into and the motorbike of her son, this kid's cousin, had gone missing, and she'd driven past a major accident on the highway. And then later that night, the police and her sister came to say that her son had taken the motorbike and had been killed at 8:05 p.m.
Jesus Christ.
That's one of the stories I'm not surprised you brought that one up, because in Spirit Sisters, that's one of the ones that people remember and talk about. And his spirit came to his mum, and it's a very kind of confronting encounter because he didn't know that he'd passed. And so he found his way home and he was screaming and swearing at her, "Mum, what the F has happened?" And she was a psychic person. She knew these, but obviously that's her son. And she was sitting on the veranda, I think, with her sister, and they were consoling each other. And the mum saw her son's spirit make his way home, and she was trying to communicate to him that he had gone and that he was no longer on this plane. So it's a really, really confronting story. And Shane, that's her name, the mum, I'm still in contact with her. She's a lovely woman. And that's the other lovely thing about the stories. I am in contact still with some of the women, even the women in Spirit Sisters like Shane.
So you talk about Tasmania. Now, Tansy lived in Tassie for many years. I've been there a few times. It is a island of ghosts.
I have a spooky story I think you'd both love from
Let's
Tasmania.
hear it.
One of my good friends while I was there, he was from North Tasmania, and in the early 90s, it's a very sad story, a young girl went missing in Hobart, so down the bottom. And this woman lived in a small town in northern Tasmania. And for about 2 weeks, every night, she had a dream of this little girl being like, maybe we go this way, maybe we go this way. Like they were trying to find somewhere to hide for hide and seek. And she kept having this dream. And then every night she had the same dream where the girl was always wearing the same clothes. She'd never seen this little 3-year-old girl before. And then it came out in the news that this girl was missing, came out with a photo of her saying she is wearing this. It was exactly what this woman had been dreaming of her wearing. She kept having these dreams that they were trying to find a spot, like a hiding spot, and they couldn't find it, but it was like a game. And then one day she was not even asleep. She was hanging out the washing out the back, and she had a flash of the little girl being like, "Silly you, it's under the bridge." And she had this vision of this bridge in Hobart, and she called the Hobart police and was like, "I think that little girl, her body's under this bridge," and it was there.
Wow.
Yeah.
You never told me that.
Yeah, it's one of my favorite stories from a friend of mine, because we were talking about kind of spirituality and we were doing, sitting around smoking cigarettes and talking about our astro charts, and he was like, "I think my mum's a witch," and told us this story, and I was like, "I think you're right. I think your mum is so divinely tapped into something." Because, she's not from Hobart. She doesn't know the area. She just knew.
That's so interesting, because it's not just one dream.
No.
This is an ongoing communication.
Yeah, she was with her. It was very interesting.
And I think that raises so many interesting questions. And the first one for me is, why that woman?
Yeah.
So she's open, yes, but you would imagine that there are others who are also open. But how did she find her way to that person?
Absolutely.
In particular, I think it's a really curious question.
Well, that's an interesting point, because, the women that you interviewed are quite disparate, location, socioeconomic, education, ages. What is the thread, do you think, between those women?
Yeah, that's such a good question. I think it's just, well, firstly, I believe that, and we talked about this too, Kate, in the car, that all of us have this to some extent. It's not a non-human feature. It is part of our humanity, and it is a dimension of our humanity that has been repressed, and especially in the Western world, we've been conditioned to think these things are not possible.
We're told we're crazy.
We're told we're crazy. That's right. And so I think that the common thread is that this is natural to all of us. But, just like I can get on the piano and not play a tune, but you might have had a few lessons, Kate, and you can do a bit better, and maybe Tansy, you can play, and then there's
Not at all.
Chopin,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So there are all these different sort of levels of
right.
because in some ways it is a talent
Yeah.
as well. So I think the common thread between the women is that they are to some extent more, we can describe it as more tuned in to themselves,
okay.
or that their awareness, because and that parapsychologist that I spoke to for the book, he talked about it as expanded awareness. He said it's about your awareness and the expansion of your awareness.
Yeah, because you say that women who can pick these energies up, you have to have a multitasking brain.
Yes.
You have to be able to read the room and know what's happening, and I think I don't necessarily think all men are able to pick that up. Some men, absolutely, but not all men can multitask in their awareness.
I agree. What I was going to say before is it reminds me of you talking about kind of the seances that you witnessed as a child and this kind of craving for the home country. It feels like this really, forgive the wanky language for a moment, this very like colonial homogenization of spirituality, right? And this patriarchal idea as we colonized the world, that we distilled what quote unquote spiritual practice is, or spiritual awareness, or kind of being tapped into other energies and other fields that was kind of seen as corrupted or wrong or sinful in some capacity. And it feels so connected when we've been talking about it today for me to kind of this idea of masculinity and control and reform and like these colonial practices that have kind of stripped so much of the world away from that cultural practice. And
totally.
it now has to be this rebellion to practice these things that your family and your ancestors have been doing for thousands and thousands and thousands of years.
Yeah, I love how you put that, Tansy.
Thank you.
I love that. And it's not something that I explored in Spirit Sisters. I wasn't at that point then, but yes, I've reflected on that. And, Spain is a country that is very religious and Catholic. But in Galicia, where my ancestors are from, there's this really fascinating merging between the patriarchal religion and the pagan practices that tie Galicia
there were
back.
a lot of witches that were killed in Spain.
There were.
Yeah.
And there's a real connection between Spain, especially this region in Galicia where the pilgrimage, the Camino ends, and the Celtic lands. So, we talked about this at our reading as well, so that there's an interweaving of the Irish and the Scottish people and the Spanish, especially the Irish and the Spanish. So what I love about Galicia is that it's kind of this mishmash, this mystical land, and they honour the religious rites, but they mix it with pagan festivals to the seasons and the sun and the moon, and I just love that. And fire.
And I think we were burned.
Yeah.
And now it was dangerous to say what it is. And I just keep encouraging women, and I'm going to keep encouraging the listeners of this podcast to stop second guessing yourself. Trust your intuition. If you get the message, write it down. I've got a friend who's a medium, and she keeps a little small notebook, and she just writes down all those synchronicities and downloads, and then she'll go back and look at it and go, oh, okay, that's that message. Everything is signs and symbols.
Yes, absolutely.
And, I think it's really powerful. But Karina, I'm going to put the link to your books in our show notes.
Thanks, Kate.
I could spend all day talking about this. Please come back again.
Fun. Yeah, come on down.
Just, you are so wise and connected, and I feel really honoured to have you here. Now you have your own podcast. Give it a shout out, please.
Oh, thank you, Kate. Firstly, I want to say thank you to both of you for the invitation. Likewise, I feel the same about you and you, Tansy. We only met this morning, and so honoured to meet you both. It's so lovely to be sharing this together, and I would absolutely love to come back. But how fun is this for Halloween, huh?
Yeah.
My podcast is called Spirit Sisters, and it's on Apple and Spotify, and also just newly on YouTube. I'm starting to film them and pop them on, which is, we were talking earlier, it's kind of work, but it's very enjoyable, and it's my heart's calling to share these stories. And I echo what you say about women, really honouring their intuition and the messages that come through. I'm passionate about that. I've got like 10 million different notebooks. I've got one for the dream diary, one for the synchronicities. Write it all down. Don't forget it, because that's your inner wisdom, and you don't need to go elsewhere. It's talking to you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I don't care what you say.